Alright, y'all, we're doing another moto vlog episode here on Buttcrack Cycles. Going to go ride the Ironhead Sportster. Many of y'all on this channel are familiar with this bike. This is a 83 Sportster. And kind of the theme, the point of this video is I just kind of wanted to take a few minutes and talk about why those of us who ride old bikes like this, old Harleys specifically, why do we do this? And like, what's the draw here when objectively a bike that's 10 or 15 years newer than this is still pretty old in the eyes of many people who ride? You know, if you show up to your local bike night on a 93, they're gonna say, "Oh man, it's a cool old bike." You'll probably be the oldest bike there, but why do so many of us still pick and choose the 50s, 60s, 70s, 80s stuff instead of that 90s, 2000s? This is kind of not a spin-off, but like a part 2 of a video that I did last week, and we're going to talk about that some. Let's start this thing up, let it warm up, and open the gate. Notice I've been box scraping with the tractor here through the second driveway that I recently pushed in, and might as well let the cat out of the bag. I've already done so a little bit on this channel. I'm building a new shop, an actual real shop, and so I needed a driveway to access the shop to build it, the concrete truck to come and everything, and also be a way for my customers and myself and my friends and such to get back and forth to the shop without having to go through my driveway. You know, that way my wife can leave her car parked there. So this will all eventually get gravelled in, but for now it's just dirt right here, and this stuff's actually pretty soft. And then I box scraped in some gravel at the road yesterday. Nope, that's second. Alright, so let's go. This is kind of a 3-part episode, I guess, to some extent. The first part is that I needed to test ride this bike. Here's the gravel I was talking about. I need to come back with a broom and get a little of that out of the road. Anyways, the first part is that I needed to test ride this bike. If y'all caught my last Grundle Run prep episode, my last episode actually working on my own stuff instead of working on other people's stuff, you'll know that I missed Grundle Run. I had transmission issues with the shovel head that were too bad, or you know, too extreme, that I did not feel safe and comfortable riding that bike. The roughly 550-ish, maybe closer to 600 miles round trip that trip was going to be. And my backup plan was to take this bike, and then I ended up with a flat tire on this thing, and so that has been resolved. I took it to my local independent shop that really the only thing I use them for is tires, because I can do everything else on a bike. And they were able to put a tube in this tire, and it's been sitting for 4 or 5 days, and I've checked it every day and it hasn't lost any air pressure. It doesn't seem to be leaking, so we're gonna roll with it, and everything seems good. So yeah, I needed to test ride this bike. I got a new microphone for the GoPro, so hopefully that takes care of all the clicks and pops that's been in my GoPro audio lately. And finally, we're going to talk about the sort of, you know, the point of this episode, the title of this episode. Why do we ride this old stuff? Anyways, with that out of the way, let's jump into the sort of meat and potatoes of this episode. My last Shop Talk episode was about Harley died in '85, and some people, I think, took that the wrong way. They kind of took it as I was like trying to gatekeep Harleys and say that the only cool Harleys are pre-85 or whatever, and that's not what I said in the video at all, and not how that video was meant. Basically, the point of that video, and you're welcome to go watch it yourself, was that with the introduction of the Evo engine for the roughly 85 model year, 84, 85, came a change not only in the bikes that Harley was making, but also in the people who were buying them. And then that, of course, changed Harley culture. It's going to. And culture evolves and culture changes, and that's just natural. And this wasn't a video about things were better before then, because I don't know, I wasn't alive. It's just my reflections and observations of a change in culture from stuff that I've read, people that I've talked to. But the most interesting part to that video and that sort of thought experiment was, as always, the comments that I got from y'all. And I would just kind of want to touch on a few of those, because I think it broadens this conversation, and I think that it helps flesh out this sort of thought experiment of that post-Evo Harley culture. So the first thing is that obviously the Evo engine came about during the late AMF years, and AMF was responsible for developing the Evo and then beginning to put it into production. But then the buyback happened with Willie G and etc., and so he kind of gets the credit for that. The post-AMF years get the credit for the Evo engine, even though the development happened during the AMF years. With that said, AMF definitely changed and shaped the way that the company operated, and they ramped up production numbers, and they sort of set Willie G and Von Beals and the shareholders and the Eagle Soars Alone crowd up to be successful mass producing bikes, making lots and lots of bikes, to make sure that there was a bike in every showroom, and then trying to find a butt for every seat. And then the 1-2 punch of that, of course, is that the Evo was really super reliable. And so you have this combination of a dealership network that has changed, as far as it's no longer mom and pop dealers that just, you know, only have 1 or 2 bikes and really know their customers and might be in the middle of nowhere, to a dealer network that is focused on being close to the interstate and keeping a large selection of bikes in stock, and aren't necessarily concerned with how many repeat customers can they have, how well can parts and service the bikes that have been sold. They're more concerned with selling bikes, selling bikes, selling bikes. And that was something that a lot of people brought up. They're like, man, I really miss the old mom and pops dealerships, because these were dealerships that would sell you a bike, and then you developed a relationship with them, whether it was with the parts counter guy or the service writer, or even the mechanic in the back who's doing the work on your bike if you were unable to do it yourself. And that is something that I think, and that people have expressed to me, was a critical part in that sort of pre-Evo Harley culture, because the pre-Evo bikes, as we all know, were prone to breakdowns and problems right off the factory floor. And so people understood that if they were buying one of these bikes, that they were going to have to wrench on it some. It wasn't going to be something you could just get on and ride across the country without an issue. And that was the understanding and sort of the pact that you signed with your motorcycle when you bought it. I'm going to take care of you, and then you will take care of me. And so when you had these little small mom and pops dealerships selling these bikes, they were more committed, I think, to standing behind it and taking care of their customers, and, you know, developing a one-on-one personal relationship with the guy that bought the bike, because, you know, they might only sell 5 bikes a month. And so that was something that a lot of people brought up, was the small dealership, mom and pop dealership culture, and how that, you know, kind of disappeared in those post-AMF Evo years in the 80s, and definitely into the 90s and 2000s. The other thing that people brought up was that one of my favorite comments that I got on that last video was, I can't remember who wrote it. I'll try and find it and screenshot it and put it on the screen. I think it was kind of a long comment, but basically something that this person said was, in the pre-Evo years, those of us who rode Harleys rode them in spite of them being a Harley. Essentially, they knew that these bikes were, you know, I don't want to say steaming piles of crap, but that they knew that the Honda was a more reliable bike. And yet they wanted the Harley. They wanted the name, they wanted the look, they wanted the heritage, they wanted the sound, they wanted the image. They wanted to ride an American bike. They wanted to ride a Harley. And so they were willing to put up with all of the idiosyncrasies and issues that these bikes might have had just to be on the Harley. And when the Evo rolls around, you didn't have to really deal with that anymore because they didn't really break. So you got to be on a Harley without having to do it in spite of it being a Harley. And I think that's such a wonderful way to phrase it about these old bikes. Like I said at the start of this video, I could very easily go get a 90s Sportster, and I bet your average dude on a Milwaukee 8 Road Glide, probably at the bar on a Saturday night, wouldn't be able to tell the difference between this bike and a 93. He probably couldn't tell you the difference. Some guys will, some guys will know what this is, older guys, but a lot of guys who are newer to Harley culture, who have only ridden twin cams and Milwaukee 8s, they would just see this bike and a 90s bike parked right next to it and not know the difference. So, you know, why do we do this? Like, why am I not riding a 90s bike? Why am I riding an 80s bike? Well, for me, it's pretty personal. I've talked about this a lot on this channel. This was my aunt's bike. This bike's been in my family for generations. Well, not generations. This bike's been in my family for decades. I guess I'm the second generation to ride it and take care of it. And so it's personal. I grew up seeing this bike in the garage and seeing the pictures that her and my uncle would bring back from all their motorcycle trips. And you know, thinking that she was the coolest person ever. I still do, by the way. And you know, there's probably people who have that experience on an Evo, but man, you really gotta want it on one of these old bikes. You really gotta want it. And it's cool to hear from those older people, the graybeards and stuff, in my YouTube comments saying things like, yeah, we had to want it back then too, man. Like, nothing's changed. And you know, you had to want to ride that bike. And there's stories that I've heard people tell me about, you know, a guy would go buy a motorcycle thinking he's going to be, along came Bronson, and he buys an older Harley. Maybe it's a 10-year-old bike at that point in time, you know, maybe it's the mid 70s and he buys like a mid 60s Ironhead Sportster or something like that, right? And just doesn't know what he's getting into, and he ends up sitting in pieces for years, or he ends up selling it and whatever. And maybe that guy then in the early 80s, mid 80s rather, says, man, I want to try that Harley thing again, and he goes to the showroom and he buys himself a brand new Softail Evo bike, and now it kind of looks like a chopper because it's got that straight leg frame look, looks like a rigid frame even though it's not. And it's got this brand new Evo engine, it's got a warranty, and it's got this new revamped dealer network to stand behind it. And the same guy that, you know, 10 years ago was wrenching on this 60 Sportster in his parents' basement and couldn't figure it out and sold it, now he's got a decent enough job and he can make the payments on the bike. And you know, maybe he's somewhat mechanically inclined, but other than changing oil and spark plugs and whatever, he doesn't have to do much to this Evo bike. So now he gets that along came Bronson experience. He can go travel the country, he can go do motorcycle things, and that's not a bad thing. I think that's the thing I want people to understand about my last video. I wasn't saying that the Evo was bad or that the Evo ruined Harley culture, because if I meant that, I would have said that. The Evo changed Harley culture. Doesn't mean it changed it for the worst, just means it changed it. And I don't know, I like thinking about this stuff. I like the philosophy of motorcycles and of Harleys and old bikes, and like, why do we do this? And I had a conversation on the phone the other day with Corey from Saddle Tramp. And Corey, I hope you don't mind me paraphrasing you in this video. Corey told me something in response to my video about the Harley culture and the Evos and whatnot. He was like, man, you know, I've had this conversation with some folks that are older than me, and Corey's a little older than me, and so he's talking to people that are a little older than him. And something that Corey mentioned to me was that in his discussions with, you know, old timers, that the question was never, hey man, what are you doing tomorrow? Or hey man, are you going to this show or this camp out? The question was always, when you called your buddy to go ride on the phone, hey man, is your bike running? Because that was a valid question back then, right? And it's still a valid question today with these older bikes. And I think that that's like a paradigm shift that we've experienced as motorcycle culture, from hey man, is your bike running, to hey man, are you free? Because if the answer to hey man, is your bike running, no, then the response more often than not used to be, well, we're all going to come over and help you work on it. So you'd have this swarm of greasy, dirty old bikers, and they'd come over and bring some tools and bring some parts and descend on your house, and y'all sit out there in the driveway or the shed or the garage or whatever, maybe even work on the bike in the living room, and you'd figure it out together and you'd work on it together. And then when it runs and it shifts and it stops and it rides and everything's fixed, everybody kind of cheers because y'all did it together. And like, that's such a cool like bonding experience. And the times that I've been able to do that and such with friends and whatever, like, it always just feels great, whether it's old bikes or old cars or anything like that. And some of that I think is missing. That was a great point. And that's part of why I like doing YouTube, is because people can bring up stuff to me that I necessarily wouldn't have thought about, and then once they tell me it, I'm like, oh yeah, absolutely, that's totally true. So it's interesting to me, you know, hearing all this stuff from all the different folks in person, in text message, in YouTube comments, about y'all's experiences with old bikes back then, and seeing how, as much as things change, to some extent things stay the same. The old bikes are still cantankerous, perhaps more now so than ever, but the flip side to that coin is that we have the internet, we have YouTube, we have cell phones. The information is right there at your fingertips waiting for you, and most of the problems on these old machines have been figured out. The solutions are known. We know how to fix this stuff, and there's a wealth of information and experience and knowledge. So I goofed up and forgot to clear the memory card before the ride, ran out of space, so y'all will get some footage from a different ride. Anyways, the point I was trying to make in that was that there's plenty of knowledge now today in 2025 about how to fix these old bikes. And so the excuse of I don't know how to work on it isn't really a valid excuse to stop you from owning one of these old bikes, but I don't want to work on it honestly is a pretty valid excuse. That's a comment that I get a lot, both on YouTube and real life. People will say, man, I like the old bikes, and I might even own a few of these old bikes myself, but if I just want to go ride, I'm going to ride something newer. I'm going to ride an Evo bike. And people tell me all the time on this channel, like, man, Paul, you really just need to get an Evo so you have something that's always ready to ride so you can just go ride. And honestly, it sounds pretty good, and might be something that I do end up pursuing. But for now, and really for the vast majority of my time as a Harley rider, it's been spent on vintage bikes. So why? Like, other than the fact that this Ironhead is a family piece, you know, why do I put that much effort into it? Why do I put that much effort into my Shovelhead, which is, just a Facebook Marketplace find that really is an absolute piece of junk, and I've been banging my head against the metaphorical wall of that bike for the last 2.5, almost 3 years. Why do I do it? Why do we do this as vintage Harley people? I can't really give a good reason for it. I think that there is something different and something special about these old bikes. There is a different brotherhood. There's obviously the general brotherhood of everybody who rides, and then sort of everybody who rides Harley is a subculture within the riding culture. But even within that Harley culture, those of us who are really deeply committed to actually going and riding these old bikes, not just putting them on a trailer and bringing them to shows, but going out and putting miles on this stuff and proving to the world that they can still do it, that these bikes can still hang, they can keep up with your buddies on Evos and twin cams, and that you can still make long distance trips. Why do we do this? It doesn't make any logical sense, and it doesn't have to. And really, I think that's where I'm going to leave this episode. I think there's just something inside those of us who love this stuff and love it in the way that I love it that just drives us to do it, to get up every morning and walk out there to that old bike and turn the wrenches and put in the time and the sweat equity and the blood, sweat, and tears and the frustration and the money into keeping this stuff alive and keeping it on the road. It's just important to some of us. It doesn't have to have a good reason. It doesn't need to make logical sense. And we can fully and readily own and maintain and ride these bikes knowing that it is an illogical thing to do. It doesn't really make good sense. We should probably all be riding Evos and twin cams and stuff that's more reliable if all we cared about was just riding the bikes. But these bikes are often so much more than the sum of all of their parts. They have their own individual character and their own little souls and their own quirks and idiosyncrasies. And I love that comment that I talked about earlier. I love the thought of we're doing this in spite of these bikes. These bikes are actively fighting you oftentimes to not be reliable, and you love them so much that you just power through and make it happen. And I don't know, for me and my personality, that's a really good thing in my life and something that I'm really glad that I have. So if you're part of that brotherhood of vintage Harleys, happy to have you here. If you're just watching and you're riding an Evo or a twin cam or Milwaukee 8, still happy to share the road with you. Y'all have a good day. Thanks for watching. I'll see you on the next episode. Bye.